Nate, we are back and we are talking what we would trade every single old running back for. These are running backs that are on the cliff, on the precipice of their careers not being as fruitful as they have been. And, honestly, we can probably say for a lot of these running backs, if we are selling, we'll have the option to kind of talk through buying scenarios and holding scenarios as well. But if we're selling, I think with all these guys, we can pretty much say that we either don't see ourselves competing. We're assuming the cliff is upon us or has already come. Maybe we don't believe in the offensive situation this year. We know offensive situation is tied to running back pretty heavily. So if they're older, we don't believe in the situation. We definitely want to get out. And some of these guys, maybe they're just not as needed on our lineup, and we want to get out with whatever value we can before that value kicks off. But all these running backs are going to be 27 years or older, which is sadly old for Dynasty's sake. It is what it is, and these videos are what they are. And you guys have been enjoying this series. I hope you like this one too. Leave a like on the video. If you do, comment down below what you trade some of these older running backs for and what you'd be looking to get in return for them. And if you want to talk that many more trades with us, head on over to patreon.com/Dynasty Rewind. Get in that Discord server for a free 7-day trial and see what we can do to help out your Dynasty rosters. But with all that said, Nate, all the promo in the books, let's get to the content that people came for. You were tasked selling Saquon Barkley off the rip here. What do you got? What do you want to do with him? Are you more in the buy camp, the sell camp? What would it take to sell him either which way? What do you think with Saquon?
I'm actually, I don't usually do this with older running backs, Bob, but I'm actually interested in buying Saquon Barkley right now. His value is up there. I believe it's like around RB 5, 6, 7 on Keep Trade Cut. So he's not what I would necessarily consider a value. But he did sign a 3-year deal with the Philadelphia Eagles this offseason for almost $38 million. 26 of that is guaranteed. So he's got a nice contract for himself. He's definitely there for the next 2 years. There is an out after 2 years. He might finish out that 3-year contract, but we know he's at least there for 2 years. And talking about offensive situation and how that's linked to the running back success, I am really excited for the Philadelphia Eagles offense this year with Kellen Moore coming in as the offensive coordinator. I expect this team to pass the ball more. And while we're talking about running backs and I'm talking about a team passing the ball more, I'm actually excited about Barkley being that pass catching weapon that he's always been with the Giants. He can be utilized for the Eagles as well. They have a really strong 1-2 at the wide receiver, but they don't have a strong third wide receiver. Their tight end, Dallas Goedert, I think is good, but he is not the elite tight end that some kind of expected him to become when he took over from Ertz. So Barkley is really going to be that third target most likely for this offense. Add in the rushing ability. And the fact that with Jason Kelce retiring, I don't expect them to use the tush push nearly as often for Jalen Hurts to, rack up all those rushing touchdowns. Saquon Barkley only averaged 6 rushing touchdowns per year with the Giants. That was not a lot. He could not find the end zone a lot because the offense was not very good. DeAndre Swift last year only had 5 rushing touchdowns because Jalen Hurts kept stealing all of his touchdowns. So if that goes away, Barkley could be looking at a career high in rushing touchdowns. I expect him to hit double digits. With that kind of production, add in the pass catching that we know that he is capable of. I think that Barkley is going to have a really good season. I think he could have a really good season next year as well. Have a really productive 2 years there with the Eagles, and then we'll see what happens after that. But when looking at running backs, I'm not really looking outside of a 2-year window anyway. So with Saquon Barkley, you do have to pay up for him, but he is outside the top 50 on Keep Trade Cut. And we're talking about a guy that I expect to finish top 12, absolutely. Has a potential to be a top 5 guy this year, maybe even the RB1 overall with that offense, depending on how the touchdowns go. So with Barkley's upside and the fact that we know that he is really good as long as he's on the field, I think it's worth going after Barkley if you're a competitive team. If you really want to go for the championship, Barkley's a pretty good buy right now. It's a little bit cheaper than Bijan, Breece Hall, CMC, but realistically has the same kind of potential in the seasonal ranks this year. I mean, he's usually about the 4th or 5th running back drafted in redraft right now because we're expecting a big season from him. So with his value being kind of close to Kyren Williams, Zay Flowers, T. Higgins on Keep Trade Cut, I think that's a good value to go out and get a running back if you need one to really solidify that lineup. Can you move him for, get him for 2025 first to a rebuilding team that's looking to move off Saquon Barkley? Now, obviously, if you're projected for a late first, you're probably going to have to add something onto that to actually get Barkley. But he is 27 years old, so teams are looking to move off of Saquon Barkley right now. We know that 27 is usually the cliff for running backs, but Barkley, he's got that athleticism, the elite athleticism, elite prospect coming out of college that I expect him to play a couple more years and be productive, into about 30 years old. So I'm not worried about his age at this point. There's some other running backs we're going to talk about that I am, but Barkley I'm not. So a 2025 first, maybe something a little bit on top of that, depending on the team scenario that you're getting Barkley from. And then another player I like to throw out there, Michael Pittman Jr. Wide receiver, I think, has been very productive, has been a target hog with the Colts. But with the wide receiver room getting a little bit more crowded, with Anthony Richardson and the unknown of what he's going to be able to do in supporting wide receivers for fantasy, I wouldn't mind moving off a guy like Michael Pittman Jr. to go get a running back that I feel really good about putting into my lineup for this year.
I am also very high on Saquon's production this year, along with all of the Eagles. One of the benefits of being a patron, or at least a gold tier patron, I know I touched on it for getting in the Discord. I have projections out for over 250 players right now, and all of the Eagles are, trending way up, stocks up because of Kellen Moore coming to town. That offense should be a lot more inventive, a lot more points friendly, let's say, than it has been in recent or last year. At least it was good the year before with Shane Steichen calling the shots. But definitely a fan of that. So if you want some projections, over 250 players projected already. I'm into round 2 of projections, getting even more players projected and dialing things in that much more. But version 1.5 of my 24 projections are available. But yeah, I'm bigging on this. I do agree that I think it probably takes a little bit more than a first to get him. And if you're selling him, you should get a little bit more than a first. And I think depending on what direction you're going, selling him for a Michael Pittman, if you're looking to turn things around and compete next year, or you just want to beef up your wide receiver room, whatever the case is, Michael Pittman at his age, good enough target to go get. Will be around a little bit longer. We know the shelf life for wide receivers is a little bit longer than running backs and a little bit less volatile down the stretch as well. So I like this a good bit.
Yeah, if I was trading Saquon, for a wide receiver, I want a top 20 wide receiver. Talking about Michael Pittman Jr., kind of at the bottom end of that top 20 in the dynasty ranks, maybe a DK Metcalf, a Nico Collins. I would obviously love a Nico Collins if you can get that deal done. Those guys are going to be a little bit higher on the dynasty ranks than Barkley. But once we get a little bit closer to the season, the running back value, I think, is going to push Barkley up. Or you could probably trade him for one of those wide receivers in that wide receiver 15 to 20 range, if you like.
I don't disagree with that at all. Once we get to the season, people are going to realize once they start setting more lineups. I know the best process is to, have these lineup setting practices that you're going through, or dry runs that you're going through already. And, as soon as after your rookie draft, having, some idea of what your starting lineup is. But fact of the matter is, not every dynasty manager does that. So once we get closer to the season, the reality sets in of what people actually need for their lineups. And that's when you can pounce on some of these situations for sure.
And Bob, I will say something I've been doing this offseason, a quick little tangent here. This offseason, I've been doing a lot more best ball drafts on both Underdog and DraftKings. And that process of going through best ball drafts and looking at the rankings and seeing where people are on these players has really helped me get ready proactively for the season and looking at my lineups. And, I have some teams where my dynasty value in my lineup is great, but my seasonal value in the lineup is not as good as, just a quick look when I'm scrolling through my different leagues. So having those redraft rankings, those best ball rankings, and going through that process, that can really help you understand what your lineup needs to look like before everyone else figures out what their lineup needs to look like.
As much as I love Dynasty, you're touching on a great point here. As much as I love Dynasty and will always play Dynasty, I haven't been as in on redraft the last couple of years, but it is such a good way to kind of ground yourself with what expectations should be for some of these younger players. You touched on the dynasty value of a lineup and versus the 1 year shot image of what, or 1 year snapshot of what this lineup can be, and being able to, like I said, differ between the two and see like, hey, I feel really good about this lineup for this year, but in reality, it's more of a good long-term lineup than a now. And just oddly enough, just because you brought it up, we just did a roster review for one of our patrons, Devin, and he said the same thing to me. He's like, I feel like I love this team, but I feel like it's too dynasty. And he's like, I don't know if that makes sense. And I'm like, I know exactly what you mean. His wide receiver room was like Malik Neighbors, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, and Marvin Harrison Jr. And I'm like, yes, everyone loves to have that wide receiver room, but as rookies, as much as I have very high expectations for Malik Neighbors and Marvin Harrison, as rookies, we know things can be a little volatile with them acclimating to the league. 100% love that point that you brought up there. It's a great add-on, though it is a tangent. We will get back on track here and talk about one of your running backs, a new addition to your Ravens running back room, Derrick Henry. This is one where he's probably a better buy than a sell at running back at this point, because I don't think you're getting great value selling him, but especially if you're trying to compete. But the wheels have to fall off sometime. I'm not going to be the one that tries to predict it, because many better analysts than I have projected and been wrong plenty of times. So while I'm not going to say that happens this year, if I'm selling, I'm either banking on that happening, or I just want to squeeze out the value I can while I can, as I mentioned at the top. If I don't feel like I'm being competitive at all in 2024, why keep him? Let's get some future value for him. I have faith in a good year from Derrick Henry, so I'm not just going to sell him for nothing or sell him low. And honestly, seeing his value still actually pretty decent in most dynasty ranks, near DeAndre Swift, who I don't love, but I do love the fact that he's the running back one on his team. He's significantly younger. And I think he's probably locked in as a running back 2 or running back 3. So I lose some output because I think Derrick Henry obviously has the upside to be a top 6 running back still, especially in that offense that should be scoring plenty of points. But at this point, if I'm still trying to stay competitive and just try to kind of shift value from where it's going to fall off a cliff sooner rather than later with Henry, I'm guessing compared to DeAndre Swift, maybe that's a bold call. I don't know. I'm trying to see if I can make that shift in value. Obviously, you're going 1-for-1 at the same position. You're probably having to add something to one of those sides. I'm guessing you'd probably have to add something to Henry just because of the youth that DeAndre Swift provides. You'd probably have to add a third. Maybe you get a fourth back. Who knows? But if I'm not competing this year, his value probably tracks as a 25 second and 25 third. Assuming both picks are later, that's why you get 2 picks, a late 25 second, a late 25 third. If they're buying Henry, I'm assuming they're a more competitive team. I'd settle for a single second if that pick looked like it was going to be earlier to mid as opposed to a later second from a good team. Whatever the case is. So that's where I'm at on Derrick Henry. I am probably in the camp as more of a hold. He's somebody in my projections that favors really well in this Ravens offense, just with what Derrick Henry is and what that offense has been able to put together with running backs. I know, we have some of, that Greg Roman stigma that this team is all about running backs, but that team has made running backs good. I mean, Gus Edwards put up double-digit touchdowns last year, which is nothing to scoff at. And Gus Edwards is not Derrick Henry. That's a very easy thing to say and be right about. So I like Derrick Henry in this offense, but if you're selling, that's what I'd be looking to get. Some pivots I'd be looking to make. Nate, feel free to drop in any thoughts you have on him.
Yeah, I think Derrick Henry right now, his value is a little low for how we expect his season to go,
Sure.
production-wise. Taking a look, going into another way of how do we look at different resources for Dynasty that aren't the typical traditional Dynasty resources. We all go to Keep Trade Cut, Dynasty Daddy, we go to Fantasy Pros. We have our different websites that are very fantasy football focused that we all go to, but like talking about using best ball rankings and stuff like that to get a head start. What are some other resources we can use? One I like to look at is sports books, actually. Looking at FanDuel right now, Derrick Henry is the second odds-on favorite to lead the league in rushing touchdowns this year, only behind Christian McCaffrey, and he's barely behind Christian McCaffrey. So, when the sports books who make a living off of this kind of stuff have Derrick Henry as the second favorite to lead the league in rushing touchdowns, there's a lot of expected production with him this year. It's very easy for us to get kind of locked into the fantasy football mode, and we're looking at a 30-year-old running back. We're like, oh, well, analytics say he's not going to do well. Well, this is Derrick Henry we're talking about. And if we took a step back from the analytics and from being so close to fantasy football, you would look at this and you say, Derrick Henry on the Ravens offense, wow. Like, I want to draft that guy in the first or second round of my redrafts. And maybe it doesn't work out that way, but also I think this is a pretty good bet. I don't know what he's going to do the 2-3 years from now, but I think he's going to be very, very productive this year as long as he's healthy.
The one crux in any analytic is when you look at analytics, Derrick Henry has been bucking analytic trends for his entire career. And yes, at some point, Father Time will win out, but you have to factor that in once you talk these analytics. Oh man, he should have fell off a cliff 2 years ago. It's bound to happen now. It's like, well, Derrick Henry was never supposed to be this good. So I know at his size, and yes, he has great athleticism and all that, but between lack of receiving work that always is like a knock for running backs and things like that. But yes, love him very much this year if he can manage to stay healthy in that Ravens backfield, which is not something we hear often out of a Ravens backfield. It's tough going out there. But either which way, we will move along to a player I think I like a little bit more than you do this year, and maybe it's my Packers bias shining through. I don't know. But you think it would wear off because he's going to a competitive team or a competitor, a division rival even. Not that really does much for me in my personal feelings, but we're talking Aaron Jones. You were tasked with selling him. What do you want to do with him? What are you hoping to get out of Aaron Jones?
Yeah, Aaron Jones turning 29 during the season this year. He's played in 97 games throughout his career. Like I said, turning 29. So we're talking about players, age catching up to him. He's been an efficient running back. He's actually, been an efficient running back for most of his career, had a great yards per carry. But last year averaged the lowest yards per carry of his career in a very efficient offense with that Green Bay Packers offense. So the Vikings is kind of a step down. And that's what worries me. If we already
Sure.
saw the downhill trend with Aaron Jones last year in a very efficient offense, and he goes to the Vikings where I don't expect nearly as an efficient offense. Number one, because the Kevin O'Connell offense is more pass heavy, and a different style of offense than Matt LaFleur and the Packers. And the rushing for the Vikings over the past couple of years has not really been great. It has not been good. Now, when Dalvin Cook was there, you can argue he was washed. Last year, they didn't really have any running back that you'd really want starting on your NFL team. But despite that, they have a rookie quarterback this year. There's just a lot of unknown with this offense, and I'm not as excited to just plug in a 29-year-old running back there and expect the best. Now, the one thing Aaron Jones does have going for him is he's always made a living with pass catching. He's been really great with that, and that's how you get running backs that jump up the production rankings because maybe they don't have the carries and the rushing touchdowns that some other guys might have, but the receiving work can really boost a running back in fantasy football. But last year with the Packers, Aaron Jones only had 30 receptions, which was a career low for the last 5 years, outside of his rookie and second year. For the past 5 years, that was the lowest by far. The second lowest of the last 5 years was 41, I believe. So quite a jump down to only 30 receptions last year. The Vikings themselves had 62 receptions last year to the running backs, and Ty Chandler had 21 of those. Ty Chandler's still there. The team has been very excited about Ty Chandler, talking about him as the 1B, not the backup to Aaron Jones, but actually part of that 1A, 1B with Aaron Jones. So even with the pass catching upside that Aaron Jones has, I don't think he's going to get as much volume to really buoy his production to be that, even touching that top 24, I think is going to be kind of difficult for him. I think he has the upside to get into the top 24 and be an RB2 this year. But with Ty Chandler there and the unknowns of that offense, I'm thinking he's probably going to be more so an RB3 with some weeks where he blows up. But the consistency, I'm going to be worried about. There's been a lot of talk about Aaron Jones being injury prone over his career, but if you go back and look at his games, he really hasn't missed as many games as you'd expect with that narrative. So I'm not really going to have that play into this. This is more so about the pass catching, limited upside there, and that's where he's really had his bread and butter the last couple of years. So with all that kind of limiting his upside, I'm looking to sell Aaron Jones. He's not worth a ton right now, so he might be a better hold if you're already competitive and you have him. But otherwise, can I get a younger running back? Some guy who's actually on the Packers right now, Marshawn Lloyd. Can I move him from Marshawn Lloyd and hope for the upside there? Dontavian Wicks, another Packer player. I would be interested in, Bob. I know you kind of like Dontavian Wicks. You've been growing on him this offseason. So it's question marks over there. So I'd be a little bit cautious about making that move. My favorite move to move Aaron Jones for right now would be going after another older running back if you have to, James Conner, who we're going to talk about in just a moment. But I feel a bit safer with James Conner in the volume that he's going to be getting in that offense versus Aaron Jones.
I get a lot of the concerns, and I just pulled up one of the things I factor into my projections is looking at intended target share, what their target share was intended to be without missing time and things like that. So if they were the time they were playing is what the target share is factored in for. And Aaron Jones has gone down the last 3 years and how many targets he's getting in the share of the offense. So that's worth noting, especially the last year being the lowest with Jordan Love throwing the ball. The first year with that offense coming together, did miss some time, but with that intended target share, it's all factored in. So I like the pivot here if you're not looking to compete to Marshawn Lloyd. Dontavian Wicks is somebody who is just such an interesting piece because for him to really break out or be a guy that's worth having on a dynasty roster, several things need to happen. Christian Watson needs to be moved. If Christian Watson is traded, it's wheels up for Wicks. That's what you need. That's borderline what that statement means, and probably Reed as well. But Wicks would have much more opportunity if Christian Watson were to go. But that offense is so spread out right now. Wicks would need that to happen. I haven't projected as like the fourth receiving option at this point, or the fourth wide receiver option at this point. So I'm honestly like, if you want to take a shot on a Packers wide receiver at a discount, Romeo Doubs is the guy because he's gotten most of the target share over the last 2 years. Has been Romeo Doubs, and it's like at this point, yes, it's kind of like a mid target share. It's like 17 to 19%, which is not anything special, but it's been the most on the team the last 2 years. So even with Christian Watson and his games when he's been healthy and all that factored in, but I don't hate the shout here. I don't mind the concerns you have. It's one of those, if you can buy him super cheap, I'm in. If you have him, hold. I'm all about it. Because I definitely get it, especially with that Vikings offense being very sus at running back. And it's kind of the chicken or the egg conversation, I feel like, with, is it because they haven't had a running back that can do it? Alexander Madison, we talked about all offseason leading up to the season. He's a mid-tier running back, not great. We can't expect that much out of him. Dalvin Cook, while he was there the last year or so, he was, kind of washed up like you alluded to. So it's like, is this Vikings running back system been bad, or has the running back itself been bad? But Aaron Jones, as you've kind of highlighted, kind of trending downward. Does that really fix it, or does it just feel like it
kind of
will?
seems
So
like more of the same, right?
yeah, exactly. So I still have optimism for Aaron Jones in this offense, but I definitely 100% see the concerns. But you touched on him. We're going to talk James Conner now. Reason to buy or sell, somebody I am definitely more in than out on at this point. I think as fun as Trey Benson is, and as much as we like the situation he landed in, rookie running backs in this type of situation, we need to just get over the allure that immediately kicks off. Oh man, Trey Benson's there. James Conner's an old ass running back. Why would they give the ball to James Conner? I don't know, because he's been extremely productive over the course of his career. He's been an awesome playmaker with the ball in his hands. He's the guy in 2024 until he's not. He's poised for a great season despite his age. He's absolutely in line to be a top 24 running back at worst, with upside to be a running back one. In points per game last year, I believe he was a running back one. I should have had that statistic pulled up, but my bad. So at this point, I am, like I said, more likely a hold for me than a sell. But if you are selling and there's something you can get for him, there's not a lot super exciting out there. He's in the range of Aaron Jones. Not much exciting out there that you can get in return, except for Benson. Assuming that this is a non-tight end premium, their values are relatively close. But if you're just looking to move on and not compete in 2024, this is a solid move. However, if you are looking to compete and willing to take some risk, I'd be interested in someone like Jerome Ford if I can upgrade a pick in that deal as well, because right now we're going to talk about Nick Chubb at some point in these videos, I believe in part 2. Right now, Jerome Ford's the backup. A lot of people are in the realm of, hey, Nick Chubb's going to be fine. He's going to be back. He's going to be the guy. Jerome Ford put up double-digit top 24 weeks last year as a running back, and I would take that. If I can get a pick upgrade that makes up for the risk of taking on Jerome Ford, let's say Nick Chubb has a great year, I only get a pick upgrade out of it and I get a handcuff. That's not super exciting, but at least I got that pick upgrade. If I just got Jerome Ford, don't love it as much. So James Conner is a tough sell for me unless I'm not looking to compete. If I'm looking to stay competitive, that's the move I'd look to make with James Conner. But Nate, feel free to share your thoughts here before you get into your next one.
Yeah, I just looked it up. But James Conner was the RB 13 in points per game at the running back position.
Close.
So close to RB1. Just missed it by 0.1 points, right behind Jonathan Taylor, actually. I know. So I'm actually a big fan of James Conner this year. I think this is probably his last hurrah as a top running back for fantasy. But I think it's going to happen one more year. Trey Benson, next year is probably his year to kind of take over. Maybe we see a little bit of it by the end of the season. Mm-hmm. But James Conner was really consistent last year. I think he's kind of had the injury-prone narrative as well, when he hasn't really been that injury-prone. So some of these narratives, you kind of got to check into how many games they've actually missed, and it's really not that many. A running back misses 4 games. That's just kind of average at this point in the NFL. So James Conner, I think, is someone that, if you're a competitive team, is a great buy right now.
But yeah, 100% with the injury-prone mindset. And Aaron Jones, just kind of rewinding a little bit here, he gets that because the first 2 years of his career, he, like Christian Watson, couldn't get his hamstrings right and was just inusable, unplayable, because he didn't have healthy hamstrings. But he got that right. Been a great running back since.
It's like Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen really struggled to stay on the field the first 2 years, and he's been super consistent since.
And that's even more annoying because those were freak injuries. That was an ACL and a lacerated kidney. Don't tell me he's injury prone when it's these crazy outlandish injuries that never, well, ACLs happen plenty, but lacerated kidneys do not happen that often. So either way, but before I get too frazzled on that narrative, let's move on to Joe Mixon here. You got him. I know this is a guy you're not super big on as well. You're just not a big running back guy, unless they're young bucks that you can build around for years. And just
I look at running backs like Leonardo DiCaprio looks at women. Okay.
Oh Jesus, that's rough. But okay, Joe Mixon here. Tell me what you're selling him for, what you're doing with him, why to sell, all the fun stuff. What do you got?
Yeah. So I've never really been a Joe Mixon fan, to be quite honest, and a little bit of that. It's just kind of my own bias based on off the field stuff when I was watching him as a prospect and looking into him. So I try to take that out when I'm a fantasy advice giver. So here I do have him as a sell, but also I don't mind him as a hold because his value is not super high right now. I don't think you can get a ton for him, so I don't mind holding him because he is going into a lot of volume with that Texans offense. We're seeing him move from the Bengals to the Texans, and there's going to be volume there because I don't think Dameon Pierce is really going to be much competition. I think he'll be a solid backup for Mixon, but Mixon is the guy there. He got paid pretty good money to be there. He's there on a 3-year deal as well. They do have an out after 2 years, but looks like he will probably be there for at least 2 years. So you do have a little bit of future upside too. You probably get to have Mixon as your starting running back in 2025 as well. He is turning 28, and like I said, not much competition, so there's a lot going for him, but career average 4.1 yards per carry. He has never been an efficient running back. Joe Mixon has always been a volume running back, and that's one of the reasons I've never really been a huge fan of him. But in fantasy football, we do still have to chase volume because when there's volume, there's consistency and there's a good floor. So with Joe Mixon, he did catch 52 passes last year, but it was a career high, second career high. It was up there. It was one of his best years as a pass catcher. For many years, Gio Bernard was the thing standing between him and those top fantasy finishes because he couldn't get the receptions. Start to see it the last 2 years with the Bengals. He now goes to the Texans. He only had 45 receptions by their running back last year. That was pretty low, lower end of the spectrum there in the NFL. And they also went out and got Stephon Diggs. So they're going to be running a lot of 11 personnel. They're going to be having a lot of 3 wide receiver sets out there. I don't think Mixon's going to see, 52, 60 passes again this year. I think we're going to see him probably get around 30 to 40 receptions this year, which also limits his upside because he's also not a very efficient runner. So if he's going to average, around 4 yards per carry again, he's going to have 30 to 40 receptions. We could see a very solid RB2 finish for Joe Mixon, but he doesn't really have that RB1 upside, which is taken into account when you look at his value. So that's why I also consider him a hold. If you're a competitive team and you already, are kind of thin on running back value, you can keep Joe Mixon. He's going to be a solid RB2 for you. Probably a pretty good RB3 if you have that kind of depth. But if you're looking to go cross position, I think Joe Mixon's a pretty good sell because he has enough value as a starting running back where you can get a good tight end. George Kittle, Evan Ingram, both tight ends that are kind of undervalued right now for their expected production this year. And you can move Joe Mixon for one of those guys and really shore up your tight end one for this season. And both those guys, everyone looks at George Kittle, thinks he's like the same age as Travis Kelce, and they're looking to move off of him right now. George Kittle's 30 years old. Travis Kelce's 34 years old. There's still a couple years of production to come out from George Kittle. So I'm a fan of going after George Kittle, Evan Ingram. Both those guys have been productive, both top 5 tight ends last year. So what can we do with Joe Mixon to move him for a really productive player at a different position? I think the RB positional value kind of gives you that value when moving Joe Mixon. Mm-hmm. I'd also look to move him for a 25 first if I could, maybe 2 seconds. If you have some running back depth and you're just looking to move up Joe Mixon, I think that'd be a really good value too. You might not be able to get that first right now, but closer to the season, if he has a solid game or two where he's seeing 20-something carries, I think you might be able to make that happen.
Just touching on your point of him being last year was his 3rd best receiving year.
There you go.
With 52 receptions. The years prior, 2022 he had 68, 2021 60. And last year, 2023, he had 50. But the nice thing about that is his best years have been since 2021. So that's something worth noting. That over the course of his career, over the course of his career, he's improved, especially these latter years. And the thing is, he's not going to have any competition out of that backfield for receiving. So there is that too as well. But I definitely see your point. I definitely agree. He's been a volume player, which it is kind of sometimes catches a bad narrative to it, I think, because it's like, well, he's not super efficient. But, something Noah likes to touch on a lot is like, hey, if he's still getting the volume, the coaches see things we don't and, have, their own values on players for if they're getting the volume, something's got to be going right. He's reliable with the ball, whatever the case is. They believe in him to make plays. Whatever it is, they want to get the ball in his hand. So I agree with wanting to sell. I understand the sell. But again, I'm also in the camp of, hey, if you can hold him and he's a good running back too for you this year, great. I don't think there's a lot wrong with that. But I think if you're selling, I think Kittle or Ingram is a good tight end option, like you said, or 25 first, multiple seconds. I don't know if that gets me as excited. And if you have to chase a first, you might be looking to 26 for first, which if you're just looking to move off a running back and not necessarily get a running back in return, like we said at the top of the video, you just want to get some value out of this guy. You don't need him in your lineup. he's excess depth, which is hard to find at running back, to be honest, but it might be the case, or you're just looking to rebuild 26 first. If that secures you a first, I don't think that's the worst thing in the world. And maybe you get like a 25 third to make you feel a little better about it or something along those lines. I don't know. Don't hate the point at all there, Nate, touching on Joe Mixon. Getting to the last player here of part one. Before we get into part two, you'll have to stay tuned for part two. We got some studly older running backs that we'll talk about there as well. But I'm talking about Austin Ekeler right now. This is a guy who has been on the decline, or saw a sharp decline in 2023. And I don't really see that stopping. He didn't get brought into this offense, in my opinion, to be the guy. I expect him to get a good bit of work in that offense as a receiver still. I don't think he's going to get as much in the running game, which has been, while he's never been like 1,000-yard rusher or anything crazy like that, he hasn't been a stat pattern when it comes to his rushing. That helps, all of the work helps. And so I don't think he gets a bulk of that. I think Brian Robinson gets a lot of that, most of, if not all of that. But things are certainly trending in the wrong direction. We saw a dip in efficiencies last year. We saw a dip in this, that, and the other thing. And I know he was kind of banged up for part of the year, and that's hard to ignore. But when you're 29, that's something that is worth very much noting. And it's tough selling him, because the only productive assets, if you're looking to stay competitive in his range, are guys like Tyler Lockett, old, not great. Curtis Samuel, somebody who just doesn't excite me. I know he's poised in a good spot this year, but just not somebody I'm super excited with. But that's probably somebody that is a smart move, or at least a decent bank move if you're looking to pivot to wide receiver. Gabe Davis, arguably productive. Never when you want him to be or when you don't want him to be, because he can never figure out what days he's going to pop off and which he's not. But also in that range, Nate, of running backs, Gus Edwards is kicking around in there. And as much as I know we caught some flack on the channel with one of the videos that we talked about adding Gus Edwards, because, well, you're adding a player who's just surely going to drop off in value at some point because he's older, even if he's going to have a good year. I don't agree with it, Nate. I'm just saying that it was out in the ether. But Gus Edwards projects to receive the bulk of the workload in Los Angeles, which is a swap I'd make very easily at this point. Austin Ekeler, getting off of him, going to Gus Edwards, while it might be a one-year shot, I feel a heck of a lot better about Gus Edwards situations than I do Austin Ekeler at this point. And I will admit, in my first round of projections, I had Austin Ekeler with a rather rosy projection, but I'm going through round two now and reworking all the projections and things like that and trying to make them that much more better. And I know Austin Ekeler will dip in my next round, to say the least. So things to think about. Those are options I'd be looking to get. But man, if you're trying to just offload them for pick value, you're maybe getting a second round pick. It's not great out there. And maybe in the season he does better. Maybe he has a pop off week one. I know that's a cliche or a hyperbole that gets thrown out there a lot. It's like, oh, after he has a good week one, you'll be able to do whatever with him, but unlikely all the same. I think the bad taste is still in people's mouths with Austin Ekeler. Enough people have had him over the course of their career, or had him last year, where they're just not as excited to have him.
Everyone has seen that video of him going down the left side of the field along the sideline and just running like 12 miles an hour. Yeah, we've all seen that video. So
yeah, it's a rough time for Austin Ekeler, who, hey, he's been a very exciting piece over the course of his career. But hey, like we said at the top, all things come to an end. Father Time will win out. Anything to add on to Austin Ekeler before we get on out of here, Nate?
Nothing to add on Austin Ekeler, but I will say, in my best ball drafts, I have like 75% exposure to Gus Edwards. Please go buy Gus.
Yeah, especially for the cost of, probably a late second at worst, or at most. But, I've seen trades for thirds, for other players that I just don't have a lot of interest in. It's one of those, like, yes, don't expect him to be a running back one, maybe not even a running back two, but he's a great auxiliary running back to have down the stretch of the season. And I hope this video was a good one to have. Leave a like if you made it this far. Comment down below some of these players you're selling or maybe buying. Maybe you're on the other end of the spectrum. What are you looking to get for these players? We want to know about it. We want to see you over in our Discord. Get in there, patreon.com/Dynasty Rewind for a free 7-day trial. See what we can do for your Dynasty team. But with all that said, all the pro in the books, Nate and I are going to get the heck on out of here. We will see you in the next one. But until then, I hope that y'all have a good one.